Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our keynote panel on gender diversity. I'm Vedika Bhandarkar, Head of Investment Banking for Credit Suisse in India and their Vice Chairman. We're going to address a highly compelling question for investors. Does the presence of women on boards translate into reduced volatility and enhanced corporate performance? Credit Suisse Research seems to indicate that it does. According to a study last year, over the previous 6 years, companies with at least some female board representation outperformed those with no women on the board by 26% in terms of share price performance. Further, in 2009, when Fortune 500 companies were ranked by the number of women directors on their boards, those in the highest quartile reported a 42% greater return on sales and a 53% higher return on equity than the rest. Governments are also responding. In Italy, a law was passed requiring listed and state-owned companies to ensure that by 2015, 1/3 of their board members would need to be women. Currently, only 6% of directors in Italy are women, one of the lowest rates in Europe, compared to 14% in the EU as a whole and 16% in the US. Recently, Hong Kong has also joined international efforts to get more women serving on the boards of listed companies. The move has the support of the securities regulators in Hong Kong and China. HSBC, Goldman Sachs, PCCW, and Swire Properties are among the 35 international and Hong Kong listed companies who are advocating an all-rounded board representation. Some experts believe that companies with women directors deal more effectively with risk because they address concerns from customers, employees, shareholders, and the local community better, and then they tend to focus on long-term priorities. Studies have also shown that the presence of at least 3 women is necessary to change boardroom dynamics. All of this is very good food for thought. To help us digest all the issues at play, we're joined by 3 very distinguished panelists from different parts of the investment spectrum. From the asset management community, I'm delighted to welcome Eileen Murray, Chief Operating Officer and Co-President of Bridgewater Associates, a leading hedge fund. Ms. Murray has over 2 decades of Wall Street experience, and in 2008 was named one of the 20 most powerful non-bank women in banking by US Banker magazine. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Representing the corporate world is Mr. Nicholas Sallnow-Smith, Chairman of the Link Management Limited. He has over 37 years of experience in the finance and treasury field, and he was the Chief Executive of Hong Kong Land Limited between 2000 and 2007. He understands the dynamics of public company boards very well and has elected to ensure that at Link Management, there's good female board representation. Thanks for being with us, Nick, today. Last but not least, we have Ms. Fanchek Wan, representing the banking sector. She's the Managing Director and Head of Research Asia-Pac in the Private Banking and Wealth Management Division of Credit Suisse. Ms. Fan has been an equity analyst throughout her banking career. Prior to that, she was the political editor of the Hong Kong Economic Journal. Great to have you with us. It is also a pleasure to introduce our moderator, Su-Mei Thompson, Chief Executive Officer of the Women's Foundation, a nonprofit organization established in 2004, dedicated to improving the lives of women and girls in Hong Kong through research, impactful and innovative community programs, and education, media engagement, and advocacy. Ms. Thompson previously held senior management positions at the Walt Disney Company, the Financial Times, and Christie's. She's an alum of Cambridge and Oxford Universities and IMD, where she was the first woman to graduate on the Dean's List. Su-Mei, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Vedika. Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this morning's panel on gender diversity on corporate boards. Over the next 50 minutes, we'll be looking at questions like, what are the benefits that can be ascribed to gender diversity? Can those benefits be measured? And should investors vote down all male boards? As Vedika mentioned, around the world, women continue to be underrepresented in corporate boardrooms, but the winds of change are blowing, with governments, regulators, and organizations around the world focusing in on this issue. Last month in the US, a group called the 30% Coalition including institutional investors representing $1.2 trillion of assets under management, wrote to 127 companies with no female directors, encouraging them to increase the female representation on their boards. And the group says that they won't rest. They will continue to engage with companies until women hold 30% of corporate board seats across America. Here in Hong Kong last week, the Women's Foundation launched the 30% Club, a group of major chairmen and public figures committed to getting more women onto corporate boards. So Nick, I'm going to be asking you, are men the new feminists? But first, let's start with Eileen. Eileen, why should companies and investors care about this issue? What are the benefits that can be ascribed to having more women on boards?
So there's a number of benefits that will be articulated as to why women should be on boards, and particularly from looking at the numbers. From my own personal perspective, the reason I think it's critical for women to be on boards is I just look at the war on talent in the world, and over 50% of the global intellectual capital around the globe are women. And therefore, if companies are going to be run and represented by qualified people, half of them are women, and at some point, half of them in the boardroom should be women as far as I'm concerned. Not on the basis of measuring men and women differently, but quite candidly, objectively, the same in terms of capabilities, skill sets, and values for the particular company. We're clearly not there, and I think in addition to getting into the boardroom, which is critical, and I talk to some male friends who say, well, there are no women available. I can give you a ton of them if you're interested in them. They are out there. I was just telling Nick that when I retire, I'm going to call him to volunteer. Anyway, so I think it relates to this war on talent, and as important as getting women in the boardroom, I think getting women in senior management positions in higher percentages is of critical importance as well. The benefits are the benefits of diversity of thought as far as I'm concerned, and the benefits of, it speaks for itself. Look at how women are graduating, look at what they're accomplishing, look at what they're accomplishing in the workforce, and I think the benefits are the same as having a qualified male on a board, which is to say having someone with judgment, who understands the business, who can push forward the interests of the company that they're a board member of, and I see it quite that simply.
Right. I think, more broadly, the benefits that have been ascribed to board diversity are enhanced decision-making, enhanced corporate governance, companies being better able to target female consumers, and some reports even purport to show a correlation, Fan, with stock market performance. Credit Suisse brought out this report on gender diversity and corporate leadership last year that analyzed the performance of 2,400 companies with women and without women on their boards from 2005. That's a pretty hefty piece of research. Is it really possible to demonstrate a correlation between having women on boards and things like stock price and financial performance?
It's never straightforward to do the quantitative assessment about the causal relation between gender diversity and financial performance. But in our research project conducted last year, we looked at 2,400 constituent stock in MSCI World and trying to assess the financial performance of companies with one or more women representation on the board versus those companies which have no gender diversity at the board level. And after we adjusted for sector performance bias and market cap bias across the big cap and the mid to small cap segment, and also across different regions, we managed to derive the findings showing during year 2005 and 2011, the companies which showed gender diversity with at least one woman representation at the board level deliver outperformance versus the group which have no gender diversity by 26%. And these also these results also echo in the mid to small cap group with those companies with gender diversity showing outperformance versus the other group by 17%. So we did see a correlation between the degree of gender diversity and the financial performance during this very specific period of our research time frame. However, it is more tricky to establish any causal relation, given that we also also noticed that for those companies which showed a stronger propensity to improve gender diversity tends to be the larger companies which deliver better performance. So their corporate governance standard relatively higher compared with the small cap company. So to draw a causal relation between the two would require further rigorous investigation, I must admit. But at least based on our studies done last year, together with extensive research into the benefits of gender diversity, we believe the wider gender representation at the senior management level will bring positive impact to financial performance. So based on our same study, we observed that companies which have higher degree of gender diversity tends to show a lower gearing ratio, and these companies also deliver a stronger average profit growth and also underpins higher valuation as reflected by higher price to book. But this is manifested in the period during year 2005 and 2011. So this could be partly attributable to the impact of the relatively more risk-averse investment and decision-making tendency of the board, which show a higher gender diversity, and that is particularly reflected in the performance result in the post-year 2008 period. So based on empirical evidence, we believe the risk aversion seems to be a characteristic of the female decision makers, and this would underpin a higher possibility for company to deliver better share price performance during period of high market volatility and economic stress. And this may also imply that the risk aversion of women decision makers may lead to potential underperformance during period of euphoric investment behavior and also with rapid economic expansion. So the impact of gender diversity may have divergent results in terms of financial performance of the listed company, at least based on the existing empirical evidence.
Great. Thank you, Fan. I'm going to take a poll later to see if the audience were convinced by what you just said. But I want to zero in on your remarks about women being less aggressive when it comes to taking risks. Are you saying that men, and panelists, I want to open this up to all of you, are we saying that men and women are different? I mean, do women come from risk-averse Venus and men from testosterone-fueled Mars? Do women bring different qualities? Do you buy into the thesis that has been touted that if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Sisters, it would still be a going concern today? Nick, do you want to
Sure.
stab at that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, clearly women are different from men, at least as far as I'm concerned they are. But I think men are different from men and women are different from women. Mm-hmm. The diversity issue, if you look at it purely as gender, you are taking an incredibly narrow view of diversity, which I think is actually damaging. And I would be extremely surprised if people had done some research and found out there was no correlation between financial performance and women being on boards, or maybe even a negative one. Would the community then say, well, in that case, we should have no women on boards? I would not say that, even in those circumstances, because I think we need to look at what's the underlying objective. What we're trying to get to is better board effectiveness.
Yes.
And it seems to me there are two routes to that. One is what Eileen was talking about. Are you tapping the broadest talent pool? And clearly, if you have an approach which says women should not be on boards, you are leaving out half the talent pool, and that's incredibly stupid if you're trying to get the most effective board. But the other way of looking at it is you want your board to be diverse in the sense of different ways of thinking, different attitudes of mind, different background. And I would argue, and this is a point which hasn't been mentioned much in the debate anywhere, but I think is crucial, is you need to have a board that is more reflective of the community within which it does business. We were hearing that the stock exchange here, of course, is supporting this subject. What they're supporting is diversity. There's no specific reference to only gender diversity. And if you look at Hong Kong at the moment, one of the political problems is that a large part of the population is taught by the media and a number of politicians that business is bad for you, that any business that makes a profit is parasitic on the community and should be stopped. That's the trend of thinking, instead of an understanding that it's only profitable business that generates any surplus for the community to enjoy. But no business trades in a vacuum. You trade in a community which you want to thrive, and the board needs to understand the community, and the community needs to understand the board and the business. And if you have a very narrow set of directors who are all male, wear the same dark suit, went to the same business school, and have done the same thing all their lives, there's no way that you have a board which can communicate effectively with the community around it.
Yes.
Whereas if you have a board which have a range of different people, men and women, entrepreneurs, corporate people, people who've been in professional life, maybe people who've retired from government, if you have that type of breadth on your board, you get a very different discussion around the board table. You could easily get groupthink with 50-50 men and women if they were all accountants from PwC who retired in the last 5 years. So you would get apparent diversity, but not actual diversity. So I'm very happy that we look for the broader talent pool, but we need to be doing more than that.
Right.
And it's not a question of testing it in 5 years and saying, did we get a better IRR on the investment? Because as Fan was sort of admitting, the possibility there are a whole series of other factors that are affecting both is so substantial that the science isn't good enough for you to come to any conclusions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Nick, staying with you, why are there so few women on boards? Is it the old boys network that's keeping them out?
No, it is. I think it's legacy.
Right.
That if you go back even 10 years, most people didn't think about the idea of finding women to go on boards. Now, the reason is because they weren't already on boards.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have male colleagues, when they retire, who say, how can I get on a board? And I say, well, you have to have been on one. Because if you've been on one, you're in the database of the search companies, and you'll pop up and you'll be on the shortlist. Which is why I've said that the key thing businesses should do now is when they had a board vacancy, say to the search company, when you produce a shortlist, there must be some women on it. Even if you don't think they're as well qualified as the men, we'll take that decision, but you must show me women on the shortlist. In the past, that probably hasn't happened. There's been no visibility. And the other thing is you've certainly had in Hong Kong a failure to use search.
Yes.
The chairman says, which of my friends do I know who might want to serve on the board? And he tends to think in terms of male colleagues over the years. Not because he's prejudiced against women, but that's just the way he's been thinking. So we have to allow that momentum, that legacy of the past to change, which I think is changing and will change. But if we're too impatient and measure it in 3 years and say we haven't got there, we'll be missing the fact that there will be a trend.
Right, right. So Eileen, coming to you, I mentioned the 30% coalition in the US earlier, this group of institutional investors who are quite exercised about the lack of women on boards. Tell us, with Bridgewater, do you have a protocol when you're faced with an all-male board? And what are the ways in which institutional investors can engage with companies on this issue if they really want to escalate it?
Well, Bridgewater is a private company. We don't have a board. In terms of our management committee, we have 20% women. That would be me.
Yeah, but how do you engage with the companies in your portfolio who don't have any women on their boards?
So in terms of the companies in our portfolios, no, that's not something we push them on. What I would say is that, and let's just put Bridgewater aside for a minute.
Sure.
I think in terms of this whole board issue, I think Nick's right. I think that this group of 30, and you see the same thing in the UK with Helena Morrissey, they're not going about quotas, they're not going about dictums, they're going about raising awareness.
Yeah.
So that to the extent that people aren't thinking and they're just thinking about, well, I know this person or that person, I do think it's worthwhile to raise awareness. And I think it's great that investors are doing that, but I don't think it should be mandatory. Mm-hmm. And I think Nick's point, when I said diversity of thought, I think he answered the question much better than I did. In diversity of thought, it is diversity beyond women. And the last point I would make in terms of your question on the statistics, I'm not convinced by the statistics, particularly on risk aversion and some of the other points. And I don't even know why we would have to measure those statistics. Meaning, if someone's a good board member, they're a good board member. We're not going to, I don't see any, I don't mean this pejoratively, but I don't see any studies on are men good board members, and let's look at the ROIs and so on and so forth. Yeah. Or let's look at the bad ROIs. And so I wonder, are we overanalyzing this when it comes down to basically what just makes common sense over the long haul, and how are we going to get there, and how do we raise people's awareness and consciousness to start thinking more broadly and more open-mindedly towards those that they think about bringing onto their boards because of the obvious benefits, as you just said, groupthink, et cetera, in terms of having diversity of thought, because I do think there are studies that homogeneity in terms of thoughts versus single thought is a lot better in terms of coming to outcomes, despite some of the wrestling that might go around to get to a common answer.
Right. That's an excellent point, actually, that there aren't studies going the other way, looking at men as effective board directors. Fan, a problem that many institutional investors have mentioned to us is that this falls into the bucket of non-financial considerations when metrics are spotty and inconsistent, like much of ESG disclosure. Are you seeing that changing? Do you see ESG reporting becoming more standardized and uniform?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a very gradual process. As I can also share our experience in dealing with some of the issue during the research process, given the existing data availability regarding gender diversity continue to remain pretty sketchy and inconsistent. And the current information availability and disclosure largely restrict to the board level. So this also limits the scope for a more comprehensive and meaningful assessment in engaging the impact of gender diversity in driving corporate performance. And that's why this also partly responds to Eileen's question. The study, if the study just been restricted to the very senior management level, this also limits the predictive power in terms of explaining the potential impact of the different composition of board in driving corporate performance. But with the increasing government intervention in encouraging women representation at senior government level, particularly in Europe, this is expected to drive a gradual change in the ESG reporting standard, particularly focusing on the non-financial consideration. But at the moment, if we examine the existing practice in terms of disclosure regarding women proportion and representation in listed company, it is still pretty restricted. I think with increasing awareness of the investment community on the broader diversity issue, not just on gender, this will result in gradual improvement in the disclosure standard and to incorporate information on gender together with other diversity consideration in the annual report. But I think the existing disclosure standard is still imply a lot of work need to be done.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we certainly hope that when companies come to comply with the new reporting requirement in Hong Kong, that they will make specific disclosure, not just of the number of women they have on their boards, but also at all levels of management to provide that important transparency. So let's see if that happens. So Nick, I've reserved my last question for you before opening the floor to remarks and questions. You've just added 2 women to your board. Congratulations. What were the main considerations when you were undertaking that board search? And perhaps I could just widen it out a bit, that question, and ask you, what kind of qualities are boards looking for in directors for the 21st century?
Well, as I was mentioning earlier, one of the things that we did do is to go to search and not depend on friends of existing board members, which I would suspect a majority of Hong Kong companies still do. And we were looking at the composition of background and talent that we already had on the board. And a lot of this was fairly methodical stuff. We had only one qualified accountant on the board who chaired the audit committee. And we felt that from a risk management point of view as the board, if he fell in front of a bus tomorrow, what are we going to do about the audit committee? So we decided we wanted to add somebody who had an accountancy qualification. We'd also, those of you who know Hong Kong, we'd lost Alan Zeman from our board in the previous 12 months because he hadn't attended 75% of board meetings, which is an interesting thing, just as a sort of sidebar. Most companies have 4 board meetings a year. We have 8 or 9. He'd attended 6. If he'd been on a lot of local companies, he'd have attended 3 and met the 75, but anyway. Now, Alan is a great entrepreneur, amongst many other things. He's certainly a very different thinking character. So we said, okay, we want to get somebody with an entrepreneurial background. We need another accountant, and we want people who understand the community issues in Hong Kong, which I was mentioning earlier. And we went to search and said, okay, give us a long list and then a short list. And it happened that on the short lists, with both of these characteristics, there were 2 great women, one of whom I knew well, friends of the chairman. The other one I didn't know at all, but other people did. And we then took those people through a nomination committee review, and all 3 of us on the nomination committee unanimously said, well, we think these 2. And they happen both to be women. And I think probably one of the reasons for that is exactly Eileen's point, that we hadn't been looking at that part of the talent pool at all. And as soon as you do, you're going to get some pretty good people coming out of that. The other feature, which we haven't really talked about, although the groupthink point was mentioned, is board dynamics.
Yes.
And this is actually quite tricky, and it comes to character, that you can have male board members who are extremely risk-averse on a personal basis, back to the research, and would never say anything to contradict the chairman under any circumstances. And, okay, they may have a different business and intellectual background, but if they have that attitude of mind, do you get constructive board dynamics with some criticism going on? Probably not. On the other hand, you can find somebody who certainly is going to speak up and disagree with anyone who's just said anything at all, who basically has a destructive attitude of mind. And is that the sort of diversity you want? Probably not. And that, for me, one of the most difficult issues in assessing people to join boards is whether you've got the right balance between constructive criticism and destructive criticism. Because if you end up with a board splintering and imploding, you have a real problem, and there have been some examples of that internationally in the last couple of years. Just as badly as if you have a board that all thinks the same, and you get the sort of committee decisions that nobody would ever take on their own, and we all know about those. So I think that the trend that we're going in is when the world is a much more difficult place to do business in, which I actually think it is now and increasingly so, if you don't have this sort of breadth of thinking, but with everyone wanting to take the company forward, you will be less well prepared for difficult times. And I think a lot of boards are realizing that, whether they're in the banking industry, the insurance industry, the property industry. We can think of almost all of, there are lots of issues. And you really need constructive board debate about what to do with these issues if you're going to make progress as a company.
Right. Right. Thank you. Right. So I'm going to open the floor now to remarks and questions. Feel free to please address your remarks to anyone on the panel. Oh, look, right here. If there are lots of hands going up, I'll take them in batches. But, Ginny, why don't we start with you?
So I'm all for raising awareness of this issue, but I'm wondering, what if raising awareness isn't enough? There's a lot of debate about quotas around the world, and I've heard people talking about this in Hong Kong. It seems that people are firmly against quotas in this community, as am I actually. But I'm just wondering, what if the voluntary measures of disclosure, discussion, raising awareness are not enough? What if it just spark, these voluntary measures just spark sort of tokenism? How do you actually make sure that things will change? Or is this a first step, and then quotas might have to come later as a stick if the carrot doesn't work? And it's for anyone who wants to comment.
Who'd like to kick off?
I've been talking too much, but just, I'm firmly against quotas because you could end up appointing the fifth accountant to the board because she's a woman, rather than appointing a man that would bring much more diversity. The second reason I'm against quotas is that I regard it as external interference in the rights of the shareholders of the company.
Right.
If the shareholders of the company want to instruct the board to add more women and, as was mentioned earlier, vote down men who are proposed, fine, I'm perfectly okay with that. But to have some external party, whether it's a stock exchange or a government, tell a company how to run itself, that seems to be one step down an extraordinary slippery slope, because what's next in terms of what we're going to be told to do?
I'm against quotas as well. And I think from my perspective, I'd be very concerned about tokenism going the other way, meaning I wouldn't want to be picked for a board on the basis of my gender or faith or anything else. I'd rather be picked for a board because of my qualifications. In terms of whether that works out or not, I think, I just kind of step back, and I'll just speak for the US. I mean, women got the vote in the 20s, started working during World War II, right? And when I look at the advances, in terms of how women have made advances in the workplace, it's really remarkable when you look at it over that time span. I know that doesn't seem very, what's the right word? Very encouraging, perhaps, to people who want to see change happen quicker, but I'd rather see change work well than happen so quickly that it doesn't accommodate what's needed. And I'm a firm believer in a free marketplace. And I actually believe, and I could be proven wrong, that to the extent companies are seeking the best talent over time, given the enormity of the number of women in the workplace, that will take place. Now, there are issues that still need to be worked out in terms of when women get off the career track, how they get back on it, how they're selected, how is this awareness at the board level, as we've discussed. But I also think that within companies and within firms, I believe firms are going to continue to want to get the best talent, and you're seeing that. It may not be as quick as people would like, but it has made progress over the years, and I think it will continue.
Yeah, I also want to add the comments regarding the affirmative action from government in promoting gender diversity. Based on empirical evidence, in fact, there have been studies investigating into the impact of this mandatory quota and more tough government direct intervention. In the short term, in fact, companies reported creation of new tension within the management team, and that is the negative token impact Eileen highlighted. And if we look at the past 5 years, for those countries which have been most active in introducing these mandatory quotas, they mainly came from the European region, and their there have been very specific macroeconomic and demographic reasons driving this mandatory quota action, including the expected decline in the working age population in the Eurozone that have added to the political drive of the European governments to introduce very active government interventional action. But in other more market-driven economies, non-mandatory and non-mandatory target and supportive initiative have been promoted rather than resorting to the quota action. So I think going forward, a more diversified action plans in promoting gender diversity would be the general trend. But I think investors in the financial community would rather see a more natural process in the review of the gender diversity development rather than taking very top-down direct government intervention through quota. And given the short-term negative impact on operation and at the board level.
Right, very good. Ginny, let's answer your questions. Right, two hands in the air here. Can we take both in sequence? Starting with you, thank you.
Hi, I'm Sam Mealy here on behalf of Credit Suisse and Project Firefly's Emerging Leaders Competition. And I'd just be interested to know what the panelists think if the corporate world has a broader social role in conjunction with governments and NGOs to tackling gender diversity issue beyond like just search requirements. And connected to that, like there's been a lot of chat about raising awareness, but to be blunt about it, and I know it's anecdotal, I mean, this room is half empty, and how do you go about raising awareness and convincing the other 3/4 of the investor community and society in general? Because I think the socialization process starts at a much earlier stage. So you have 75% of young females don't think they can become presidents or CEOs in comparison to young men. So does the corporate world have a broader social role, or is it just an in-house thing? Right. Thanks.
Excellent. And your comment over that, please.
I'm Angeline from Credit Suisse, and my question is that you mentioned that a lot of times women have to have some experience before. And since there's no experience, so how do you start? How do women start to be wanting to be on the board? And what is Women Foundation doing? And so I think that's a thing of preparation as well for women.
Right.
Shall I take the first?
Why don't you, Nick?
I always resist the idea that companies have some sort of external responsibilities beyond running a good business. I think, in fact, if you read the Articles of Association of almost any company, it will say the obligation of the board is to deliver the return to the shareholder. So if you start to say, well, actually, I'm going to balance that requirement with doing other stuff, you should be dismissed immediately by your shareholders because you're in breach. But the point I was trying to make earlier is actually there aren't two objectives here. If a company is not accepted by the community as doing something which is constructive, then in the end your business will fade away. The other way around is to say that if a company isn't assisting the community to thrive by poisoning the air or whatever, then that community is going to fade away, and so will your business. So these things aren't separate things. You're not in separate boxes. Every company works within a community. And it's one of the reasons why, which I didn't mention, when we're looking at board members for my business, which is solely in Hong Kong, and as those of you who know us, is quite politically sensitive, for me to appoint a board member from London who will fly in for board meetings and doesn't know Hong Kong at all, just doesn't work, because they won't understand the context in which we're working. So I think the responsibility of business is to engage with the community that it trades in, to make sure it understands that community and that community understands the business. And I think if you do that, then you've met your responsibility. Now, part of that may be the awareness raising point, not only at board level, but throughout the employment of the company. In fact, in Hong Kong, I think many businesses have many senior women across all of their operations, more so than in the UK when I came out here. I was quite interested to see that. And then you get to the role model and the chicken and egg point. If women are seen in senior positions by other women, then they will aspire to senior positions, and it feeds. And I was making the joke earlier when a man calls me to say, how do I get on a board? Well, you have to have been on a board. And that is an issue. And that's why I think more women need to make it known that they want to serve on boards. And more companies need to make it known that they are very happy if women apply for those positions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think your question on the numbers, that was my point about how to get more women in senior management roles. And there's a number of issues around that, and companies have taken a lot of steps in terms of flexible work hours, in terms of allowing women to take a certain amount of time off and come back in to the workforce. I think those kinds of issues that women face uniquely, because we are different from men, need to be considered in a business context, and how you re-ramp on. And I think companies are making a lot of progress on that, and it's just going to take time to continue to make progress on that. I just think when I first started working, I don't even think they had maternity leaves in some firms, by way of example. So, that sounds funny in terms of what exists today, or even in the 1960s, women in the US couldn't have their own credit card. Once they got married, they had to have their husband's signature. I mention these things because the progress has really been so substantial, and yet we focus on what hasn't been done, which is great, because you want to keep moving along, but I think there's a certain amount, as I said, of how long it takes change to occur in a rational way that's effective for everybody involved. But I do think even in your company, which I worked at, Credit Suisse, I know there's been a number of programs that have been put in place to help women move up along the ranks. And women have to help other women.
Fantastic. I see one last brave hand up there. So your comment.
My comment, because I actually sit on boards. Usually I'm the only woman in the room, and it's been lonely, so we welcome some more. But nobody asks men, have you been on a board before? They get pulled into their first one. So I object very strongly to the idea that women have to go through a training to get on a board, when actually most people will just start going on boards and they don't get asked if they've been trained. They're looked at their range of experience. They're looked at their qualities to determine whether they should go on, not whether they've been through a formal board training. And part of the induction program that a nomination committee will conduct on a candidate will be to introduce them to how the board operates and to assess their personality. So in answer to that question, I think it's just another excuse not for women not to get on boards, that they haven't gone through a training, which men don't have to do.
Let me just say I completely agree with you. What I was saying does apply to men. What I was trying to explain is that when you go to search, the first thing the search company does is to look for people who are already on boards. So that's why I have had a number of male ex-colleagues wanting to get on board, and 5 years later they're not on any. Yeah. Because they've never been on one. And this may be a disagreement with you, Su-Mei, but I completely agree that this idea that women should be made board ready, yeah. I just don't understand what that means. It's not like training to be a heart surgeon. This is to get somebody with the right character and the right experience, that if you look at their resume and you go through an interview and get to understand their type of character, that's all you need.
Yeah. I agree with you. The point I was going after was, in addition to board representation, I think there still needs to be progress made in women in senior management positions at firms, which was the question I was trying to address.
Now, we believe there is an abundant pool of board-ready women here. They're just not very visible and not being called on.
I want to add one comment regarding what the corporate world or companies can do in addressing this issue. In fact, the whole discussion about gender diversity has already shifted from the previous agenda talking about fairness and equality issue. It's more now focusing on the actual benefit of a more diverse management, which will bring to the enhancement of corporate performance. And looking at Asia, despite the economic performance and the rapid expansion in the market cap, in developed and emerging Asia, we still have 70% of listed company in the MSCI world having no women representation on the board. And for some very developed and affluent Asian economies such as Taiwan and Korea, we only have single-digit listed company which have women representation on the board. So there's still a lot to be done, especially in emerging market and Asia in regard to the raising of awareness on the gender diversity issue, because with 50% of the university graduate are actually female, but you have single-digit company which have one or more women representation. This reflect the gender issue would be more a genuine challenge for companies in this part of the world, and with more NGO and also rising awareness within the financial community in talking about the gender representation issue, we expect to see more vigorous discussion regarding actual corporate action, including coaching and mentoring, and providing more support for female professionals to get the opportunities to have engagement in the senior management level. But there's still a lot to be done.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I think the jury may be out on specific cause and effect in terms of more women on boards and financial performance. But for reasons to do with the talent pool, connection of the community, and the breadth of thinking needed to engage in an increasingly complex world, I think we can all agree that gender diversity on boards is something to be championed. And we hope to see more progress in this. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.